Afternoon, good evening, and good evening to Singapore. My name is Yuvraj Thakur. I'm the Vice President Commercial at Verifavia, and I have today my colleague with me, Mr. Nicholas Dushen, who's the President of Verifavia, to present you our first ever LinkedIn Live. It's something new that we are doing for the first time, but we thought the topic is of such a great importance that we must give you an update here on LinkedIn. Thank you to the 200 plus registrations that have registered for the event, and we hope you will take out something from the next 30 minutes. In case there are questions or queries during our conversation, please let our team know, or you could simply contact insights at verifavia.com. If you can see my screen, here is the agenda. I mean, basically, we are trying to showcase you the update on EU ETS deadline, which is coming in. The regulation is kicking in from 1st January 2024, and the implementing acts which have been recently published. We are trying to demystify the implementing acts for you. Just a bit about who Verifavia is, and what are the credentials, what are we bringing in onto the market. So, and within this, I'll also introduce my colleague, Mr. Nicholas Dushen. So, Verifavia, we've been in the market for more than 10 years, more than a decade of experience on the topic of EU ETS, starting with aviation and now with shipping. The topic of decarbonization has been very close to us. We've been helping 330 plus airlines, 2000 plus vessels under various regulations. There are some voluntary and regulatory obligations that airports, airlines, shipping companies, they have to serve, and we, with a team of 50 plus subject matter expert, we help them mitigate and come over these requirements. Just for the record, we are also doing IHM surveys with more than 1,000 surveys conducted. We have a software on IHM maintenance, which has more than 2,000 vessels on the platform right now. But what is of importance is the fact that we have years of experience under the belt. We are the only independent verifier to be accredited by Smart Trade Center. And until now, as per our calculations, we have verified close to 50 million metric tons plus of carbon verified on the Thetis platform. We are accredited by UCAS, the UK body, COFRAG, the French body, and SAC, which is the Singaporean body. To do our work on the IMO DCS requirement, we need to be also approved by various flag states. We are approved by two of the biggest flag states, Liberia and Panama. We are also in partnership with classification societies, KR and RENA. So in case you have a vessel which is in requirement of an IMO DCS service, please let us know and we could help with the problem. For on the topic of IHM, we are one of the most accredited IHM company on the market, and we are accredited by all the major players who would then finalize and certify your report. Now I will shift the focus to my colleague, Mr. Nicholas Dushan, and you can see the topic. The topic is urgent actions required for compliance. Mr. Dushan, who comes from a compliance background, who's been dealing on the topic for more than 10 plus years, he would really help you in understanding what you need to do now. Mr. Dushan will take over the presentation and he will be with you until the end of our LinkedIn Live session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Yuvraj. Good day to everyone. It's a pleasure to speak with you today, and it's also a great pleasure to be in our office in Chandigarh with most of our team of verifiers and executives. So, as Yuvraj said, there are important actions required now for compliance with ETS. The game regarding emission monitoring, reporting, and verification is changing, and the cost of carbon associated to the emissions that you will report is becoming increasingly important. And so it's important that you take actions now to be ready as much as possible for and to avoid unnecessary bad consequences. In terms of action required now, the first would be to update your monitoring plan and create an ETS monitoring plan. Most of the sections of the current MRV monitoring plan remain in place, but there are some extra requirements. In particular, when it comes to the definition of companies, there are some more stringent requirements, and a proof of delegation of ETS responsibility from the owner is mandatory. The EU will not provide templates of contracts, so you need to come up with your own template and your own clauses. But all verifier will be asking for a clear document and evidence of the delegation of responsibility for ETS compliance from the owner to a third party, who could be ISM company or some other company. You will have also to describe new procedures, because ETS is not only about CO2, but about some other greenhouse gases. In the first phase, the allowances will have to be surrendered only for CO2, but a couple of years down the line, also for methane and nitrous oxides, you will have to report and surrender allowances. There is also a new requirement for partial emission report, company emission report. Basically, unlike the MRV, which started in 2018 with the ETS for shipping, which starts 1st of January 2024, every change of fleet and every vessel being sold needs to trigger a partial emission report consolidation and verification, because your company remains responsible for the surrendering of allowances for the period during which it operated a ship. From 1st of January 2024, if you sell a ship, you are responsible for the emission report corresponding to the period of 2024 during which you operated the ship. Even if you sell it on 2nd of Jan or 3rd of Jan, you will have to do partial emission report for 1, 2, or 3 days. Company emission report will be the basis for identifying number of allowances required to comply. Basically, in the company emission report, you will have the aggregation of all emissions under ETS scope for all your fleet. Of course, you need to also engage a verifier, update the agreement you have with verifier, hopefully Verifavia, in order to reflect the new regulatory updates and the new services which are triggered following ETS implementation. We also strongly encourage you to start now to build knowledge on the ETS carbon market. As every new thing, it has an aspect of uh, uh, being a bit afraid about it. And it's a big topic. It will be a big bill. The sooner you or your team starts looking into it to understand how it works, what is the mechanism of ETS, and the better prepared you will be when it comes to buying the allowances that you will need to surrender. So as soon as the list allocating companies to member state administrative authority is published, you should first make sure that your company or the companies you are responsible for are listed. Although you will not be able to change the administrative authority. If the list in the regulation tells that you depend from France authority or Greek authority, that's it. You cannot change it, but you should make sure your company is listed. If not, you will need to contact European Commission or EMSA to do the proper changes in CETIS MRV. And you will need to create a carbon account on a carbon registry, which will depend on the member state to which you are allocated to. The process can vary from one to other. Usually, you will always need to provide some identity documents, some proof of judiciary records, because a carbon registry account is very similar to a bank account. So there needs to be multi-factor authentication and some KYC processes, because the financial amounts associated to allowances, they are huge. The current price of carbon allowance is around 70 euros. If a ship emits 10,000 tons of CO2, it means the bill will be 700,000 euros. It's huge. And the sooner you start understanding and complying, the lesser the risk of non-compliance. This quick overview of inclusion of shipping in ETS indicates that first, there will be a phase-in period. So in the year 2024, you will have to surrender allowances for 40% of your emission, only on carbon dioxide. But next year, 2025 activity, you will have to report and surrender 70% of emissions and then 100%. The number of gases involved will also be increased. And you need to start monitoring methane and nitrous oxide from 1st January 2024. Although for ETS, you will not need allowances for these emissions before a couple of years. Important to note as well that the threshold when it comes to general cargo and offshore vessels will be decreased. And from 2025, all offshore and general cargo ships above 400 gross tonnage will have to comply with their obligations under ETS. When it comes to the year 2024, the rule for ETS is the same as MRV. The ships above 5,000 gross tonnage have to comply, and below, they don't. There are some key dates to keep in mind when it comes to ETS implementation, and some of these key dates are coming very soon. By February 2024, you will know which administering authority do you depend from. By end of March, you must have submitted your monitoring plan according to ETS, so taking into account the changes. We'll come back to that. But your ETS monitoring plan must be updated and verified before end of March 2024, so that you can submit them to your administering authority via TETIS MRV by 1st of April 2024. So not that much time available, taking into account that the MRV verification of 2023 data is happening at the same time. When it comes to TETIS MRV, a big change associated with ETS is the mandatory use of TETIS MRV platform for assessment of monitoring plans. You will have to create your monitoring plan for every vessel on TETIS MRV. There are functions to copy-paste some procedures which are at the company level and can be the same for all your fleet, but some other will be really ship by ship. So keep that in mind and consider in the allocation of resources to ETS MRV that this important step of monitoring plan of TETIS MRV is not avoidable. For clients of Verifavia, using the Verifavia extranet will of course provide you some format in which you can export your monitoring plan and import it on TETIS MRV to facilitate the transfer of monitoring plans as much as possible. But ultimately, you are responsible for what is entered on TETIS MRV, and you will have to proceed and to submit and to use the platform in order to be compliant. From 2025 onward, so when we verify the data of 2024, the deadline for submitting verified report will be different than it was for MRV. The new deadline will be 31st of March 2025, meaning there will be 3 months between end of the year, beginning of 2025, and deadline to prepare the report at the ship level, convert the MRV report into ETS because the emissions that you report under MRV are not the same as you report under ETS. In particular, when it comes to geography or the phasing period, 40% only is what you will have to compensate in the first year. And by 31st of March, your company emission report also has to be verified and submitted to administering authority. So the game is changing. The game is becoming more challenging. The time to comply is getting shortened, and penalties for non-compliance are being increased. So it's really in your interest to consider the topic seriously now and start anticipating and preparing for it now. The deadline for sendering allowances to your administering authority via a carbon registry will be 30th of September every year from 2025. Some key elements when it comes to compliance for EU ETS. So, as I've said, ETS is not new. Uh, the inclusion of shipping is new. And from 1st of January, the shipping emissions will be included under EU ETS, although the system is in place since 2005. It was initially applied to fixed installations, so big factories for cement, for chemistry, for glass, and also aviation since 2012. The reporting of emission and the surrendering of one allowance for each ETS ton of CO2 reported is mandatory. It's a regulatory requirement, regardless of the flag of the vessel and regardless of the route, as far as the route touches EU port. Of course, emissions of carbon or GHG within EU ports also have to be included in your report, and you have to surrender allowances for these. On the contrary, emissions outside of EU ports, so emission within non-EU ports, should not be reported under the ETS. There are some derogations which have been included for in the ETS regulation. For example, if you are operating voyages to outermost regions or to small islands with less than 200,000 people inhabitants, if you have some contract for obligation of public service, these are also exempted. There are some benefits for ships using renewable fuels as far as these fuels are certified. And there are some specific derogations. For example, for ice class vessels, you can reduce reported ETS emission by 5%. Also worth noticing the case of container vessels. In order to avoid carbon leakage, the EU has identified some ports which are qualified as container transshipment ports in neighboring areas. And in particular, two have been identified. So if you operate container carriers and if you stop in the port of Tanger or in the port of Port Said for commercial operations, loading or unloading of containers, these will not qualify as port of call under the MRV and ETS regulation. You will have, if your vessel is going from Spain to China and it stops in Mediterranean port of Tanger Med or Port Said, then the voyage that you will have to report under ETS is from Spain to China. The stop in Tanger Med or Port Said does not count as a stop. It has significant implications, and of course, verifiers have a mandate to ensure that you are using the correct scope for the regulation. What is essential to ensure compliance? First, you should understand the requirements. This LinkedIn Live is a good start. We give you high-level information. We try to identify the key points, let you know what are the pain points so you can anticipate. But you really need to develop your knowledge of these requirements. The financial value of allowances is huge. And the best thing you can do is understand for yourself. Look from the regulation. There are many material available, guidance notes, FAQ, and of course, the European Commission, EMSA, are there for your question. And we as verifiers, we are also happy to provide any clarification that would be required. Second step is in terms of administration and registry. As soon as the regulation is published, it's expected before 1st of February, you need to make sure your company is listed there. If not, you need to contact Commission and EMSA and identify which is the authority you need to report to. If you don't if you are not registered properly, you cannot comply, and there could be consequences, although it's not your fault. You will ultimately be responsible. So you need to check that your company is in the list. Then you will need to open carbon account, so maritime operator holding account on the registry, and then you can comply. Update of monitoring plan on TETIS is required before 1st of April. I've mentioned it already, and the report must be submitted annually 31st of March. The first deadline for surrendering allowances will be September 2025, and it can seem a bit far away, but it's not that far away. And in order to report accurately your emissions, in order to benefit from the initiatives that you are maybe taking already or will take in 2024 in terms of biofuel or alternative fuels, or in terms of more efficient reporting of operations, you really need to start now. Surrendering allowances is the final step. There are many intermediary steps that you need to take before that. So don't think that because surrendering is 2025 September, there are almost 2 years to get ready. It's not like that. You need to be ready now, especially if you have plans to sell a vessel during 2024. You really need to be up to date and to proceed with a partial emission report verification within 3 months after the sales. I haven't mentioned, but maybe it's good to just remind you why is ETS now including shipping emissions. Basically, this data is showing the evolution of emissions from ships, and it's very clear to see that the trend is an increase in emissions. So it's a challenge for supranational objectives such as Fit for 55 or IMO carbon neutrality objectives to address the fact that emissions of shipping have been increasing. And the EU ETS for shipping, or inclusion of shipping in EU ETS, I should say, is a consequence of emissions from ships increasing. Because it increases, action is needed to ensure that there is some limit, and to encourage by providing strong financial incentives with expensive carbon allowance to reduce emissions rather than compensate. The principle of ETS is polluter pay principle. So if you pollute less, you will pay less. So it's making more financial sense to invest in emission reduction technologies, in improved routing, in performance-based monitoring, in order to reduce the cost of purchasing allowances. Because the cost of allowances will not reduce. There are some mechanisms in place to ensure that the number of allowances on the market will always be less or will maintain a high level of demand. Because for the system to work, the price of a carbon allowance has to be quite high, and the EU has the tools to maintain pressure on the price. So in practice, what does it change? Of course, companies or ships already equipped with carbon capture and storage equipment will have possibility to take that into account, providing this is described in the ETS monitoring plan. Emission factors for other gases, I mentioned some specific emission factors for different types of biofuels. Keep in mind that not all biofuels are eligible for reduced emissions being reported. There are criteria to meet, and the biofuel has to be certified. For LNG ships, there are some specificities in terms of slippage coefficient. And in terms of monitoring, besides more extensive details about the registered company, there are also some more requirements in terms of risk assessment and in terms of data flows. New reporting requirements of partial emission report and company emission report have to be kept in mind and implemented from 1st of Jan. And because at the ship level, the MRV emission report still remains important, you have to proceed with the MRV emission report, from which the ETS emission report will be elaborated. Like I said, in the MRV emission report, you need to report all emissions that go from the port of Spain to the port of China. But when it comes to ETS, Spain to China is a voyage from EU to non-EU. And as such, you need to surrender allowances for 50% of the tons of CO2 of that voyage, not 100%. So in MRV, you have 100% of emissions, and in ETS, this is where you adjust, adapt, depending on the rules and depending on the derogations that apply for every ship. In terms of responsibility, it falls back on the owner. If it's difficult to identify who is responsible, or there is some unclarity, or there is no derogation, the owner is going to be the one responsible in the end. So depending on the scenario, whether the owner has full control or limited control, or whether you assign operations of the ship and responsibility to ISM manager, there can be different models, and you need to familiarize yourself with these models to define, understand what is your situation and how you should ensure of your compliance with ETS. Because there are penalties, it's going to be expensive to be non-compliant. First of all, there is a penalty of 100 euro per ton of CO2 not surrendered. So if you need 10,000 allowances and you only have 9,000, you need to pay 100 euro for every missing ton. And you, even though you pay the penalty, you still have to surrender allowances for the missing ton. So it's doubly penalizing. And companies which are not compliant, they will be listed publicly. So it's bad publicity. Some member states may also impose some extra penalties. They need to be effective, proportionate, and dissuasive, but the definition of effective, proportionate, dissuasive may vary depending if you speak to a German person or a Greek person. And so maybe Greek government will decide for more expensive penalties than the German, or the other way around. But in any case, there will be penalties for non-compliance. And for continuous non-compliance, penalties will be even stronger. And it can go up to detention of the ship if the ship is flying EU flag. The Administering Authority will play an important role when it comes to compliance. They are the one to check that you surrender sufficient allowances, and they will be the one investigating or giving you the status of being compliant in your registry. Of course, Verifavia is there to help you as much as possible within our mandate of independence and impartiality. We provide you with dashboards that ensure you compliance. It's based on API data to facilitate the communications between your operational team and our technical teams. There can be some modules which are plug and play to your system, and the system will give you invalid data alerts that your team can work on to ensure that the data is making sense. It will facilitate the compliance process. It's basically allowing for continuous verification. And of course, it's helpful for not only ETS, but also for CII requirements. We have seen a new need in the market in terms of having voyage statement being verified, so not waiting the end of the year to see how much my ship emit, but do it at much more frequent interval, because the actors involved in what voyage will be maybe different from the actors involved in the next voyage. And you want the actors of each voyage to have a clear picture. How many tons of CO2 did that voyage emit? And for that voyage, who is responsible to pay the ETS bill? So we provide functionalities for voyage statements and verification of individual voyages so that you know for each voyage, these are the ton of CO2 emitted, and out of the total, how many are under the ETS scope, and for how many you will need to have allowances in 2025. In case you have questions or you want to know more about these dashboards or about our verification services, don't hesitate to contact us at the address insights@verifavia.com. We'll get back to you within a short time to provide you information that you want and to provide you with amendment to contracts or new contracts if required, and of course to clarify any aspect of this regulation that is maybe not so clear at this stage. Thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure addressing to all of you from our office in Chandigarh. Thank you, Yuvraj. Thank you to our technical team for organizing this LinkedIn Live. And I hope to hear from you very soon. Wish you a very good rest of day, and we'll be in touch. Goodbye, everyone.